It's been nearly 2.5 years since Zorin OS 16 released, and well over a year since the latest minor release. But finally, at long last, Zorin OS 17 is here. Now, I've previously stated that I believe Zorin OS to be one of the best Linux distros, not only for new Linux users thanks to providing a familiar and friendly experience, but also for veteran users that just want a system that just works well out of the box, as Zorin has a level of polish and attention paid to the little details that you don't tend to find in a lot of other distributions. So, along comes Zorin OS 17 to continue that trend, with a collection of welcome improvements and well thought out features, and a lot of updated apps, features, and hardware support thanks to its new ish Ubuntu 22.04 base. But that does also put Zorin in a really strange spot, with the next long term support release of Ubuntu being mere months away. So let's dissect everything here and see just how good Zorin 17 has turned out to be. So as is typical here, we'll start with a quick rundown of what's new in Zorin OS 17, because, as per usual with the Zorin team, it's some very welcome features that make for a really polished end-user experience. To start, the Zorin menu has come together really nicely over the years, but has historically only allowed you to search for apps and some settings. If you wanted to search for anything else, you needed to open the overview to access the universal search box. Well, now, regardless of which layout you use, the Zorin menu incorporates this universal search directly. So now, besides apps and settings, you can also search for files, folders, contacts, apps from the software store, calendar events, weather, and even run mathematical calculations. And this all integrates with the GNOME desktop's search settings, so you can adjust what you do and don't want to show results for directly in the system settings. This expanded search functionality might seem trivial to some, but it's something that a lot of application and launcher menus don't do. And someone that's used to the Windows Start menu or macOS Spotlight Search will definitely appreciate having this kind of functionality right here in the main menu. So hats off to the dev team for implementing it so well here. Zorin also touts much improved multitasking features, though some of these admittedly come courtesy of the updated GNOME desktop. For example, the overview now displays your workspaces horizontally, which I think is not only more pleasant to look at, but also much more natural to switch between with the keyboard or mouse. Or touchpad for that matter, since Zorin 17 also gets those nice smooth touchpad gestures for opening the overview and switching workspaces. But speaking of switching workspaces, you can now enable the desktop cube, which is a nice callback to the classic GNOME 2 and Compiz days. It's a fun effect and works well, but it is just really some extra eye candy. And what's also eye candy, but also a bit more functional, is the new spatial window switcher. If you enable it in the Zorin Appearance app, instead of getting the typical list of open apps when you press Alt-Tab, you'll now get this nice three-dimensional view of each application's window. The animations are pretty smooth here, and I personally wish this was enabled by default, as I think it looks really good. But perhaps the biggest boost to multitasking is the new advanced window tiling, which again can be enabled in Zorin Appearance. This enables window features very similar to those introduced in Ubuntu 23.10, and in fact, they might be using the same extension. When enabled, you can snap a window to a half of the screen, and you'll receive a pop-up asking which app you'd like to automatically snap to the other half. You can then resize these windows in tandem with each other. This also enables you to snap windows to the top and bottom halves of the screen, as well as quarter corners. This tiling feature can be customized quite extensively too, with a lot of configuration options as well as tiling keyboard shortcuts that you can customize. So you can really tailor the functionality to how you like to use it, whether you just appreciate the more seamless window snapping or you like quickly tiling all of your windows with the keyboard. On to other improvements, Zorin 17 inherits a drastically updated software store, again courtesy of GNOME. Though it is worth mentioning that while most of the base desktop is from portions of GNOME 42 and 43, the software app here is version 45. So it truly does include all of the latest improvements and features. Considering that Zorin 16 had a truly obsolete version of the software app, everything is so much better here, with entirely redesigned app pages that better showcase apps with bigger screenshots and more clearly display details about each app. And the one benefit that Zorin continues to have over many other distributions here is that they incorporate all three relevant package formats, those being Ubuntu and Debian apt packages, snaps, and flatpaks, all out of the box without any additional setup, coherently into a single software app. It really is refreshing to need not worry about which software application to use for which type of package, or have to jump through hoops to get a certain app that's only available as a certain type of package. To be able to just open the software store and search for what you want, regardless of all of that, is a great experience and a good way of tackling the confusing landscape of Linux packages that unsuspecting users would otherwise have to face. And of course, Zorin allows you to open app images and Windows executables directly, again, without any additional setup. A lot of Zorin's other improvements come directly from being a more recent version of GNOME. Things like the improved quick settings menu, which, funnily enough, kind of looks like something out of Windows 11, adjustable power profiles for high performance and power saving modes, the greatly improved screenshot and screen recording tool, now built straight into the desktop, refined and slimmed down pop ups when changing volume or brightness, and a redesigned weather app that manages to be modern and streamlined while remaining straightforward to use. Additionally, if you opt to purchase Zorin OS Pro, you'll get two new desktop layouts to choose from, a Chrome OS style and a GNOME 2 inspired layout. Zorin OS Pro costs just under $50 and gets you 6 additional desktop layouts to choose from, that including these two new ones, a massive collection of curated software for just about anything you'd want to do on your computer, additional wallpapers, as well as complimentary installation support directly from the Zorin team. It's a great way to support the project and get some extra features out of it. On the topic of Zorin editions, though, the desktop and underlying system have seen enough performance optimization here that they've been able to reduce the system requirements to run Zorin OS 17. If you really want to, you can run Zorin OS Core or Pro on systems with as little as a 1 GHz dual core processor with just 1.5 gigabytes of RAM, which is down from the previously required 2. Still, if you are using a machine that old or low spec, I'd consider giving Zorin OS Lite or Pro Lite a try, which cuts back on a few of the fancy features but still provides a great experience, and that can run on as little as a single core processor and just 1 gig of RAM, as well as only requiring an 800 by 600p display output. So at this point, Zorin OS 17 looks to be pretty great. So what was I alluding to earlier about it being in a weird situation? Well, it's the fact that Zorin OS 17 is based on Ubuntu 22.04, which is currently the latest long-term support release, but only for a few more months until 24.04 launches in April. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with being on a base that's a year or so old. After all, Linux Mint does the same thing. But considering that we'll likely be getting new iterations of Zorin 17 for at least a year or two, all of which will be based on Ubuntu 22.04, it may begin to feel a bit long in the tooth. Like the fact that it comes with Linux kernel 6.2 means that hardware support is decent today and much improved from Zorin OS 16, but it definitely won't support the latest hardware going forward. However, while plenty of people will point out this unfortunate timing as a glaring issue, I don't think it's as problematic for most users as it might be made out to be. I say this because the Zorin team may include newer kernels in subsequent point releases of 17, which would add support for newer hardware. And on the software front, Zorin's inclusion of Snap and Flatpak support out of the box eliminates the issue of outdated software versions. And the included desktop, of which some components are based on GNOME 41, also has numerous elements from newer versions, such as the Quick Settings menu from GNOME 42 and the software app being version 45. The Zorin team has really focused here on providing a well integrated and cohesive experience above all else. And in most regards, they've done a brilliant job of it. Now, that doesn't mean that I have absolutely no qualms with Zorin OS 17, as there are a couple things I've noticed that detract slightly from the overall polished experience. Firstly, many of the new visual features, including the window tiling and spatial desktop, are added into the Zorin Appearance app. Now, that may or may not be the best place for them. That's debatable. But what has become clear is that this app now has a lot of options. There's a very good chance that some of the settings you want to configure are going to be in here. Yet it remains completely separate from the system's settings app that contains all of the other configuration for Zorin OS. So there's a very good chance you'll have to jump between two completely separate apps to set up your system how you want to. And this also makes it unclear where you change a lot of settings. When you search for a lot of settings, either in the Settings app, where it won't show up, or the Universal Search, where instead of showing it as a setting you can change, it'll just direct you to open Zorin Appearance. For example, if I want to enable the amazing new window snapping features, they're absolutely nowhere to be found in the main Settings app. It seems like it should be under multitasking, but it's not. So maybe I'll search for it in here for snapping or tiling, neither of which returns any results because it's not in this settings app. So maybe I'll try the universal search. Searching for snapping doesn't actually show anything, but if I search tiling, then it does recommend opening Zorin Appearance, which may or may not be that clear to the user that it's in here. But even if you do realize that it's in Zorin Appearance, then you'll need to manually search around the app for it, which is getting quite full of options now. The whole situation has ballooned to become quite a mess, and there needs to be some cohesion between these two apps. The ideal long term solution might be to integrate all of the settings into the single Settings app, where all settings could be properly searched from anywhere. But even a simple solution like including an explanatory text blurb and a link to Zorin Appearance on relevant settings pages would help to alleviate the issue. Finally, my only other complaint stems from a criticism that I've had with Zorin OS in the past, and that's the division of software updates across two separate apps. Many of the apps that you use can get updates through the software store, where you manage all of your software. However, many of the system components and apps from the Ubuntu and Debian repositories don't receive updates through here. Rather, they're all updated through the separate Software Updater app that is commonly found in Ubuntu based distros. I'm sure there's probably a lot of work that would be needed to unify all the updates into the software store, but if distros like Fedora can do it, then it seems like something that the Zorin OS team should be able to do. It seems that it should be a top priority too, because it's not all that user friendly or a good design to have to manage software updates in two separate apps, especially when they tout the software store as being the single cohesive place for all types of software packages. But I only rant about that because it's been a long standing usability issue that I feel should be top priority of addressing. And barring those two specific issues that I have with Zorin, I actually think Zorin OS 17 is a fantastic release. It remains up there with Linux Mint as one of my top recommendations for new Linux users. And while I think Linux Mint can sometimes be the better all-rounder, I do think that Zorin would be the preferable choice for anyone that wants an easy-to-use system that more closely resembles the aesthetic of Windows. Zorin OS 17 should definitely be on any new Linux user's list of distributions to try. And if you do really like it, I'm sure they'd appreciate a purchase of Zorin OS Pro. It provides you some nice additional goodies and helps support their development efforts. Just like I'd appreciate you pressing the usual YouTube buttons if you enjoyed this video. I thank you so much for watching, and look forward to seeing you next time on Planet Linux. Maybe Windows users will appreciate that Zorin also has two completely separate apps for managing different settings. It's not an issue, it's a feature.